Last year, I began 2020 like many. I was full of plans and expectations. I was serving a small United Methodist church, and we had embarked on the Paragraph 213 process, a process for revisioning mission and ministry. I was pretty happy in my personal life as well. My spouse and I lived near a small park. We had a house we loved. We had a pit bull named Ira that just gave us so much joy, and we had plans to travel. We were going to conquer 2020. Anyone else start the year like that? Well, we all know that 2020 did not pan out quite as planned, and it became pretty clear to me pretty early on that we were living in the apocalypse. Now, I'm a progressive pastor, so end times and hellfire and brimstone and that sort of stuff, that's not really my shtick. But a biblical apocalypse, I know what to do with those. Because a biblical apocalypse is not this scene of death and destruction and explosions that we so often see kind of in movies. Instead, a biblical apocalypse is actually a great revealing. It is a moment when God reveals to us the world as it is. Because we all know the world is not perfect. We all know the world is broken. And in a biblical apocalypse, God opens our eyes and says, look, this is what's happening in the world. And a biblical apocalypse calls us forward. So I entered 2020 kind of in that space. The COVID-19 pandemic was huge, and it marked so many people's lives. It upended everything. It changed how we worked. It changed how we lived. But I felt like I was managing it. Managing it as best as one does when one's living in the apocalypse. But there was one other thing that 2020 revealed to me. I was pregnant with our first child. So what do you do when a global pandemic hits and you are pregnant? You admit you're living in an apocalypse and start to pay attention and ask God, what are you trying to tell me? And I realized that there were three things that kind of were revealed to me in this time, in this year. First was a revelation about my body. Because if you've never been pregnant, let me tell you, it is an experience of the body. Your body is constantly shifting and changing. There are bulges and feelings and aches and pains, and everything about what you know about your body changes. You look in the mirror and it is a whole different experience because you look completely different than what you are used to. And so I was dealing with all of this and really getting to know my body at the same time that everything in our world went online and became disembodied on a 2D Zoom screen. All of a sudden, happy hours and yoga and church and meetings and friend hangouts were all happening through this little screen. All this stuff was changing in my body, yet no one saw it. No one really knew what I was going through. And it was a strange experience because I preached every Sunday, yet no one could see that there was life growing inside of me. In this time, it took an apocalypse to reveal to me how embodied our faith is. Because I'm not just a head on a screen, I am a woman. I am white. I talk with my hands a lot. I move around a lot. I'm tall, and I was about to become a mother. Yet nobody really saw me except from here on up. And so there was this disconnect. And so I started to realize how much of our faith is meant to be embodied, is meant to be in the world. We have a faith that puts ashes on our forehead. We're a faith where we drink from a cup and eat bread. A faith that we put water on our heads. A faith that touches people, that loves people, that serves our neighbor. For me, the incarnation took on new meaning in this time as I reflected on bodies, my body and Jesus' body, and what it meant to say that God had a body, that Jesus touched people, that Jesus lived in the world and got dirty and experienced life embodied. The second revelation also had to do with body, but it had to do specifically with the skin on our bodies. With the death of George Floyd and the disproportionate impact of COVID on Black and brown communities, racism was revealed in a new way in this apocalyptic world. Because racism has always been present, it's been in our world, but all of a sudden we saw it in a new light. People took to the streets, uprisings happened across the nation, including in our city. And at this time, my African spouse and I reflected on this little Black baby that was growing inside of me. Because racial justice had always been important to me, but it took on new light when I realized this child growing inside of me would have Black skin in a world where we were still questioning whether or not Black lives mattered. And I struggled with what it meant for me to be a white mother of a Black child and how all of that played out in our world. And there were so many questions that arose. As I was writing this talk, I was asking these questions, and I felt like, oh, I'm giving a lead talk. I'm supposed to have answers. And I started to try to write some answers to some of these questions to tell you all the profound things I had learned. And I realized I was leaning into a white supremacist culture that tells me I need to have answers to all the hard questions. And this talk was even a revelation for me. Because white supremacy says I need to move to easy answers. I need to fix the problems immediately. We need to move to this perfect place. And I need to raise this child perfectly. When in reality, there aren't easy answers. When in reality, there are people who've been doing this work a lot longer than I. And so I needed to listen. I need to step into messy places and messy conversations and have those hard conversations and push myself and others to action, moving forward, knowing that it's going to be imperfect, but that is the hard work that I am called to do. And so as all of this swirled around me, there was one other major revelation this year. And it was a revelation of community. Because this community had been present amongst me, but I saw it in new ways. And the apocalypse revealed it in new ways. My neighbors, who I hadn't really known before 2020, got together and had socially distant Black Lives Matter protests at the end of our street on a busy road. One neighbor, who was a new connection, paid my spouse, who is an artist, to paint a protest mural in her front lawn. We traded sourdough starter and had socially distant backyard barbecues, or not barbecues, campfires. We listened in new ways and had new conversations. I would go for walks and I would come home and there'd be toys sitting on our front steps passed on from neighborhood kids who knew there was going to be a new baby, and they were excited to see this new life. Clergy colleagues got together over Zoom and over Facebook Messenger and telephone and text message and supported each other and brainstormed and held each other accountable and laughed and cried together. And in this time, I was reminded of what the church is. Because we always say the church is not a building, but it was reiterated to me in new ways that the church is not a building. The church is not a program. And the church is not even a set of people who gathers together on Sunday, because the church is so much larger and so much more expansive than that. The church is these relationships that God is building and God is tying and weaving together in new ways. The church is neighbors caring for each other and also allowing ourselves to be cared for. The church is the people who hold each other in prayer and in love and listen to where God's Spirit is moving in new ways. As we continue into 2021, it is clear that the apocalypse continues. There continues to be revelation after Revelation. The church and our communities and our country struggle. Institutions collapse. And we have so many more questions. And yet, new life springs forth. On September 25th, my spouse and I welcomed Breanna Illéné into our lives. Our child was named Nieji, which in my spouse's language means my heart. And I am finding that my heart is being broken open and filled in so many new ways. My heart is changing each and every day because of this child. God is birthing new perspectives in me, new revelations, new questions, and new answers. Each day is different. The apocalypse continues, but I know that God is present, always revealing and always birthing new life.